Welcome to The Geek in Review, the podcast focused on innovative and creative ideas in the legal industry. I'm Marlene Gabauer.
And I'm Greg Lambert.
On today's episode, we're joined by Ted Theodoropoulos. Did I get that right?
You nailed it.
CEO at InfoDash. Ted is a seasoned technology executive and entrepreneur with over 25 years of experience in building and leading high-growth companies. He specializes in cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and digital transformation.
So Ted also has a great podcast and YouTube channel called Legal Innovation Spotlight.
That's right.
And recently, under his leadership, InfoDash won the ILTA 2024 Innovative Leader of the Year Award, recognizing the platform's impact in legal technology. Congrats on that, Ted, and welcome to the Geek in Review.
Thank you, and it's great to be on this side of the podcast table for a change. I'm used to asking the questions. Now I get to answer some.
We'll see how you feel in about 35 minutes.
All right.
You're on the hot seat now, Ted.
Let me have it.
So could you start by telling us more about InfoDash and how it's helping law firms enhance collaboration and knowledge management, especially in today's hybrid and remote work environment?
Sure. So InfoDash is actually an evolution. We used to be a services company called AcroWire, and we started back in 2008 doing basically just time and materials consulting work for law firms. I'm former Microsoft, so I came to the table with a lot of capabilities on the Microsoft platforms. And when we started working with law firms, we recognized there was a pretty big need with SharePoint and intranets and extranets. So we started doing consulting engagements, building bespoke intranets and extranets for law firms. Then in the mid-2010s, we partnered with a vendor in the space. They've since been acquired, Handshake, and we were Handshake's implementation partner for a couple of years. And when Adderant bought them, we kind of parted ways, and we decided to build a better mousetrap, and we started working on it in 2018. We took some wrong turns. In the beginning, Microsoft had a totally different development model. It was the SharePoint app model, and it was AngularJS, and we put a bunch of time and effort into it. And then Microsoft kind of completely redid things with what's called the SharePoint framework, and they really embraced React.js. So we had to start all over, but we learned a lot along the way. And we relaunched the company and rebranded in January of 2022 as InfoDash. And it's been a rocket ship. I was telling Greg earlier, our timing was really good with frankly, there's been a lack of innovation in our space. And we're really one of the very few platforms that's law firm focused, like exclusively. So with all these AM law firms that are finally moving to M365 in earnest, they're having to start to think about what they're going to do with all their SharePoint on-prem stuff. And our platform is a great choice for taking them to the cloud.
Yeah, I would say that, the cloud environment, I don't think should be catching anyone off guard. We've been talking transitioning to the cloud for 10 years to 12 years, maybe more. And now that it's becoming more prevalent, part of that is we were forced to during the pandemic. Part of that is just the coming over, as you said, to Microsoft 365 environment, cloud environment, and plus, I think with any of the AI tools, you're going to have to be in the cloud to do that. So, what were you? Well, first of all, let me ask you this: why do you think there's why would the lack of innovation in this space? Do you think initially, understanding that this is where we're going, and what advantages do you think you were able to take advantage of during this period as we're moving into the cloud?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there have historically been a lot of server huggers in legal. And
I don't think I've ever heard that, but I'm going to write it down.
Yeah. and there's still a few holdouts in the AmLaw space, and it's largely been with firms that have a big footprint in the financial services space, and the outside counsel guidelines have been holding a lot of firms back. We have now, I used to be able to count on one hand the number of AmLaw firms who weren't actively making plans for the cloud, and I don't think I can count any now. There were a few holdouts that I won't name, but they finally softened their stance. In fact, Marlene, I saw you at TLTF last year. One of the real holdouts, they were hugging their servers hard. I had the conversation at TLTF and said, "Hey, how are you going to leverage AI?" And I heard a softer tone on their position on it. So it's been you can't. I don't blame firms altogether. I think we're going to talk about it later. There is a huge lack of innovation in the legal industry across the board, and I think that the whole Gen AI movement has lit fires. That Goldman report that came out that 46% or whatever it was of legal tasks could be automated by Gen AI, that got some attention at some pretty senior levels at law firms, and I think changing the lens slightly, which is a good thing.
Yeah. I need to go back. Ryan McLeod and Toby Brown and I wrote a 3-part series on that when it came out. I'm afraid to go back and look at it to see how much what we said actually came true. So,
it's interesting. We hear. So I had a real. I've got a podcast coming out on Wednesday with a couple of folks, and we dove into the Stanford paper.
Yeah.
And I know you've written on this, Greg, and when you look at how the Stanford paper that came a year and a half after the Goldman report, they're painting two very different pictures on Gen AI's capability in its role in delivering legal work. And again, the Stanford paper was a year and a half later. So and it's also, again, we're getting a lot of mixed messages. The fact that the ChatGPT-4 placed in the 90th percentile in the bar exam is also an interesting data point. Like, wow, this seems like it's a really capable platform. And then, we see the challenges with hallucinations and how vendors are going about mitigating that. They're not eliminating it, as the Stanford paper I read all 36 pages of it, as it pointed out. But yeah, we're getting a lot of mixed messages. I think there was so much optimism in the beginning, again, the Gartner hype curve, and now we're starting to get closer to that trough of disillusionment when reality's setting in. So it's going to be interesting to see where things go.
I just think there's different messages. So, and there's not a lot of focus so much on from the business side of things, how it can really help on the business side of things. There's a lot of talk about the legal and how it's not, doing well or not doing as well on legal tasks. But, not so much talk about, how it's really going to improve the business side of the house, which, seems to be the very logical, easier, argument.
Yeah, the listeners can't see my head nodding, but it is.
They will on YouTube.
Yeah, so I actually think that the business of law use cases make so much more sense right now as an incremental step towards rolling out an AI strategy. It's lower risk, first of all. You don't have the outside counsel guidelines and companies preventing or prohibiting the inclusion of their data into AI. There's just the risk reward, I feel like, is a better balance right now with business of law. I do think practice of law side use cases are long term going to deliver the biggest bottom line impact. Obviously, just because of the labor rates on that side of the firm are so high that saving a half an hour of $1,000 attorney worth of time versus an admin function that's $50, $75 an hour, whatever, you're going to get more impact. But I think we're going to have to the stakes are higher on that side of the business.
Yeah. I just wonder, to get a little off track here, I just wonder if it's because the AI companies are taking such big swings at the market that they're trying to figure out what can we do to get into the law firm on the attorney side, which is typically what they want to do.
That's definitely happening.
But the problem is, and I've said it 100 times, is it's really hard to get into a law firm, but once you're in, it's even harder to get kicked out. And so my advice to all these companies out there that are looking to get enterprise-wide subscriptions for their legal research product is take a smaller swing and go for some of the the practice of law business side and get in, because once you're in, then you can start expanding from within instead of trying to eat everything all at once. So I'm mixing my metaphors here.
I have a follow-up question for Ted on that. So, have you seen, sort of in your experience, some of these Gen AI solutions? Are they truly addressing on a detailed level, some of the legal questions that you see in law firms? My experience has been that's kind of a mixed bag, and that there's a lot of general. But it really doesn't sort of get down into the weeds like the attorneys expect.
Yeah, so I have limited exposure to on the practice of law side. I do have a lot of friends in that space, both on the vendor side and the law firm side, and I've had several guests on the podcast who have talked about their experience. So it's a bit third party, but the way it's been framed up is that there are certain things that Gen AI is really good at, right? Summarization, drafting. It is not a silver bullet, and currently there's a disconnect between the marketing around what the capabilities of these platforms in reality. And I think we can have a debate on the objectiveness of the Stanford paper, but one thing it did do is really start the conversation of, okay, how much oversight is going to be required? How much good are we really doing if we got to check every I and T to make sure it's dotted and crossed? What are we really saving? So, I think that on the practice of law side, they're still figuring things out. And to your point, Greg, about taking the big swings, investors are just throwing money at, the valuations are absolutely insane with these AI startups. Harvey's, I think it was, they don't disclose revenue, but I think it was like 15, 20 million in ARR, and they had $1 billion+ valuation. To put that in perspective, I had a debate on another podcast. It was a LinkedIn Live I did with Horace Wu. And have you guys ever heard of the Rule of 40? It's a vendor thing, so you may not have. But for a startup to be a good M&A target, their net profit and their growth have to total up to 40. So you can be 10% profit, 30% growth, and you've met the Rule of 40 criteria. Well, to put it in perspective, like Clio's latest round, they were 12x annual recurring revenue. If they met the Rule of 40, and I'm going to have to simplify this to keep the math simple, but let's say they were 40% net profit and no growth, because this is easier math. If they're at a 12x multiple, it's going to take 30 years to break even on that investment, right? So, when you think about that in those terms, and clearly they're much higher growth, and probably, if I had to guess, they would be less profitable because they're reinvesting all of their bottom line into new growth. When you look at it through that lens, these valuations really, when you look at, okay, when is the break even? Long term, how is this going to play out? And I think that people are really betting on, I mean, first of all, the legal market's not that big. There are only 500 law firms on planet Earth that have more than 100 attorneys, right? And that's really the target market for a lot of these big enterprise tools like Harvey, right? It's not the 3-person personal injury firm down the street. Okay, so you've got, how big is that total addressable market? And how big a market share can you get of it? And how much can you charge those customers? The math really becomes a bit of a head scratcher. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah, it's interesting because, last year we had like Thomson Reuters, dropping $650 million to buy Casetext, which I think was one, they kind of had extra cash laying around, so they had to get rid of it because they sold a seat on the London Stock Exchange. So there was, other reasons for them to plunk down that much money. But do you think, and I can't see it for the venture capitalists, but I'm thinking for the established big, players in this market, that they're okay losing a little bit of money up front as long as they can kind of lock people in to their products, and then, at the end of the day?
It seems like an arms race. It really does. If you look at some of the acquisitions out there, some of which are undisclosed, the numbers are undisclosed, like Henchman. They were pretty early on in their journey, but it's like, again, it feels like an arms race where the legal information provider world is a duopoly, and there's always tension in, hey, are we going to renew, or are we going to switch? These firms have to make decisions. And I think that even, if you can tip the scales in one direction or another, there's a lot more revenue at stake than just the actual AI capabilities that you're selling. It's the underlying legal research and docketing information, all those other capabilities. So it does feel like an arms race right now. And I can't remember if did TR sell Elite after Casetext, or was that before?
No, I think that was gone before.
Okay, so I thought that was an interesting move, and it made me wonder, wow, did they try and free up capital to make the Casetext thing happen? I don't know, but I do ask myself a lot of questions about all of this activity.
It's head scratchers for sure.
That's why I'm the librarian at a law firm and not running a big corporation.
These guys that are writing checks like that, $500 million plus, they have to really have some sleepless nights over how this is going to work or not work. And that's why there was so much. I mean, think about how high the stakes were for the implications of the Stanford paper. I mean, $650 million bet. That's that's your horse in the race. Mm-hmm. And you got a very well-respected academic institution that comes and calls in question some of the marketing claims, and it's not just TR, right? Across the board, that vendors are really, I think, overselling. Even outside of legal, the FTC is really cracking down on, they call it AI washing, where firms that, and again, this is outside of legal, that make claims about Gen AI capabilities that are bogus. The FTC's investigating, and we'll see if it's saber rattling or there's any real teeth behind it. But for a regulator to come out this early in the game and say they're cracking down, it's a real problem.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Ted, I want to shift gears for a second. You've emphasized the importance of effective knowledge management strategies for law firms. How can firms improve in this area, and what role does the technology play? Because KM's been in firms for a long time. So where do we stand now, and where are we moving in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've seen a real interesting evolution. KM and now innovation didn't really exist 12 years ago, right, as a formal department. In fact, I did a quick little study of the ILTA roster from 2014.
The titles.
Yeah, the titles. There were only 16 people on the ILTA roster in 2014, 10 years ago, that had the word innovation in their title. And today there's over 300. And, you know, when I look at that, I forget what the number is, that's an 1,800% increase in 10 years in people with the word. Is there 1,800% more innovation work happening? I don't think so. You know,
in some firms it was zero, so any growth is exponential. So
that is very true. But, you know, the with KM specifically, KM has a lot of times been a catch-all for firms, right? They don't know what to, I've even KM managing.
It's different in different firms too. I mean, it's just not like there's no clear this is what this is.
Totally, it's totally different. And even in like the AmLaw 50, I see, and they're at the far end of the maturity spectrum. I see vastly different. There are several AmLaw 50 firms that don't have KM. They don't call it KM.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a bit of a head scratcher. And when I dig into that, there's not many, but there are a few. And I happen to know people at two of those firms. And I asked the question, I was like, why don't you guys have KM? And it's political. So the leadership has a perception of KM as something not totally value add, which is crazy, but somewhere along the line, this perception was established at the leadership level, and there's still KM activities happening, but they're not calling it that. There's all sorts of names for it, but I would love to see us standardize a little bit in terms of like organizational design. I don't think it's going to happen because there's so much cultural influence and dynamics at play. But for us as vendors coming in and figuring out who's the right person to talk to, it's like a little bit of a crapshoot.
Yeah, I get those emails. Well, if you're not the person, then
Can you
who
tell
do I
us
need
who
to be seeking out? So let's jump back into some AI platforms for a little bit, because we talked about the legal specific ones. How are you perceiving the current state of AI platforms on the public side, such as ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, in terms of how it could be implemented and even kind of revolutionize the legal industry? And I heard you talk about this on one of your podcast episodes, and using the metaphor of how it's kind of like an operating system now. So if you want to kind of build on is this DOS, is this Windows 95? What are we looking at as far as how AI these platforms work within legal?
Yeah. So that was I borrowed that metaphor and then extended it. So there was an article out that I read that talked about how using Claude feels like using a Mac, how ChatGPT feels like Windows, and then I extended it with Copilot, which to me feels like MS-DOS.
All right.
I know I have a long history with Microsoft, and including working there. I know they'll get it right eventually, but as it stands now, it feels like an early beta. There are things
which is a little scary because of the fact that there's so many firms that that's an approved making
one.
Heavy bets on Copilot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, long term, I think those bets will pay off, but the real risk is that you get one shot with attorneys, right? They're going to come in, they're going to use it, they're going to go, this thing sucks, and I'm not. So
I'll never use it again.
Exactly. You're going to have a hard time once it does get better. And there are some things that I did a podcast with Carolyn Humphreys from Traveling Coaches, and she's much deeper than I am. I'll tell you where I'm at with it. Every time I'm exaggerating, it's not every time. I would say probably half the time that I try and use it, I get frustrated and go back to Claude or ChatGPT. The latest one was just this weekend as I was working on a marketing plan for next year and used ChatGPT. I tend to lean more in the Claude camp, but there's some things that ChatGPT is a little bit better at. And I copied and pasted the output into a Word doc, and the formatting was off. Bullets, because ChatGPT is notorious for bulleted lists. Like, it loves bulleted lists, and as opposed to more of a narrative format. And I went into the Word Copilot app and asked it to reformat based on, and there's plenty of information there for it to figure that out. And it just it gave me instructions on how to do it manually. I'm like, all right, this isn't helpful. So it's like, there's been several other, I've talked about them before. Like I categorize my calendar into the Covey quadrants, which are like important and urgent, important, not urgent. And I assign them these custom categories, and they're different colors. So I can look at my week and see how proactive I am. And you go into the Outlook ChatGPT or Outlook Copilot and say, summarize by custom category my week, and add up the time. Can't do it. Cannot do it. And now I posted out into the forums and got feedback, and the feedback I got was there needs to be an update. What it tries to do, it can go through your calendar and it will read the meeting title and try and create categories of its own, but it wasn't able to use my categories. Maybe they fixed it by now, but when I tried it, I don't know, 8 weeks ago, it couldn't do it. So I'm a little concerned with the bets that, because I've heard too some really big firms that are doing Copilot enterprise-wide, and I'm like, I think you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah, at least at the beginning. The formatting story reminded me, like, back in the 90s. Remember, I was working at the main library at the University of Oklahoma, and we were debating about switching over from Netscape to Internet Explorer. And the one thing that convinced me to switch over was I could copy and paste from Explorer into Word, and it would maintain the formatting. And that was the winner for me, because otherwise I spent twice as much time cleaning it up. So so it's not. Obviously they won the browser wars for other reasons, I think, but that was how they won me over. Is the practicality of being able to move between the different products and be able to keep that formatting was significant.
Yeah, we used to call it Internet Exploder. The best browser to download another browser.
Yes.
Got lots
this
of.
This is well before Chrome.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm actually an Edge user now. Which,
I am too. I'm back.
Since they went to Chromium. Yeah, it is good, and there's some interesting integrations. Like if you use Teams and you click a link in a Teams chat, and your Edge is your default browser, it'll open the page, and in the side panel, it will frame in the chat. So you can see the chat and the page that you're clicking on, and that is pretty cool. Yeah. So, I'd never thought I'd use a Microsoft browser, but here I am.
It took some convincing and doing before I did. And now actually I think because Chrome became such a resource hog, that we don't even have it. We can't even install it on our work computers anymore. Everything's Edge.
Wow. Yeah.
So, given all of that, from your experience integrating AI into legal workflows, what are, like, if you were the consultant, right? That law firm said, okay, how should we do this? What are the best practices for us looking to implement AI technologies effectively?
Yeah.
What would you tell them?
So that is an excellent question. And I guess the first question that really has to be answered before you can start to formulate a strategy is, do legal specific models warrant the effort? Right? Like if you look at...
which means they have to have use cases already in mind.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of debate on that, on specially trained LLMs perform better than the general models, and the answer is debatable, right? There's not a clear winner there from all the benchmarking that I've seen.
Well, that sounds like the perfect legal answer.
Depends on what you do.
Yeah. Well, you know what's happening, I think a lot. So the reason Copilot is getting so much traction, in my opinion, this is me just reading tea leaves, is really it's around the privacy issue. So if you use Claude or GPT, even the paid subscriptions, you cannot put client work in there. Even the new Chat GPT for Teams, I think we might have exchanged an email on this. If you read the privacy policy for that product, it does not guarantee that human eyes won't look at your data. So they're out. You're out. It's a non-starter for putting client data in there. Copilot, however, does have those privacy policies in place. So, you're kind of not left with a lot of options. Some firms are building their own, like Gunderson with their Chat GD.
I was going to ask you, build or buy. That's another area?
Yeah.
Here we go again.
Yeah. I mean, I talk about build versus buy a lot, and I'm very much in the buy camp when there's an off-the-shelf solution that can meet the majority of your requirements. And that's not the case with a lot of AI tools out there just yet. So yes, some firms are rolling their own, and they're just putting thin wrappers on. That's another hot topic these days, thin wrappers.
Yes, it is.
But, and they're just putting thin wrappers to get that enterprise level security and privacy so they can move things forward. But that's another reason why the business of law use cases, I think, make sense. You know what? Marketing, finance, they can HR. They can use those public. You're not putting client data in there, so it really opens up the scope on the use cases that you can accommodate. And eventually, I would imagine, Microsoft had to. It's not just legal, right? I mean, think about banking. Like investment banks that are doing transactional work, and you got a big client M&A deal, and some analyst at OpenAI gets a heads up and goes and buys the stock ahead of time. Those sorts of things can't happen, and Microsoft has put those controls in place, and I think they're reaping the rewards of that.
Which would be great if the AI tools worked really well, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and they'll get there. It's really the in-app copilots that I think are struggling right now. Like, Carolyn pointed out a few use cases where like you can take a Word document and turn it into a PowerPoint presentation. I've done that. It's not that compelling. Like, you're saving me some cut and paste time, but like, it's not like that thing is production ready. It's like it needs a whole bunch of work. And honestly, I could probably automate that by writing some macros. So I think it's the in-app copilots that need work. The one in Excel, well, first of all, you have to be in OneDrive for most of this stuff to work. How many firms' IG policies allow OneDrive? That used to be a huge no-no. I hear that's softening a little bit because of Copilot, but for the longest time, OneDrive was it was a hell no. It wasn't just a no. So are firms comfortable putting client work in OneDrive? I don't know.
I can tell you that from talking to a few firms, yes, they are. I think they've just decided it's inevitable,
given up,
and that they can justify. Again, I think Microsoft brings a lot of sway with it, and so I think that's why now. If you're gonna look at something like Dropbox or one of these other things, no. But as long as Microsoft has its name on it, I think it gets a little bit more leeway than the other vendors do at this point. But yeah, I'm seeing more firms opening up OneDrive.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the agent that syncs data. Microsoft's has some tools to help manage some of your IG, purview. Like if you don't know what purview is, go learn about it. It's important. But there are still a lot of. I spent a little bit of time as an auditor, a technology auditor, internal audit, and like I would look at that and document all sorts of potential failure modes. The controls just aren't as tight as they are in the legal DMS space.
Yeah, I will say the one thing is though, your DMS, your document management system, is definitely still the preferred and actually tends to be required place of storage. But I think a lot of firms are understanding there's a number of things that you may be working on in the meantime that they would rather you be putting it in OneDrive than either storing it on your local machine or putting it in Dropbox or one of these other things, behind the scenes.
Yeah. This whole
otherwise, I will get in trouble with probably my security people.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good thing that there's some softening of, because there's so many capabilities. Again, Copilot's one of them. If you want to use Copilot and you're not on OneDrive, like, good luck with that. There are some things you can do, but you will really be hamstrung. So, I think it's inevitable. Resistance is futile.
All right. So Ted, can you elaborate on the concept of innovation theater within the legal industry? And, how can firms move beyond kind of the superficial innovation or even just sort of innovation speak? Like, we're doing it, but are we really doing it? And really achieve meaningful technological advancements?
Yeah, that's a great question. The innovation theater, I stole that term from Daniel Ferris at
and
NRF.
I love innovation theater. It's it makes life interesting.
It accurately describes the situation at many firms. My first inkling of this was the concept was all the many KM folks that I knew all of a sudden just magically had the word innovation in their title. And, I started to drill in like, hey, how has your role changed? And I think that firms have felt a lot of pressure from their clients to innovate because historically the industry has been, super laggards. And, this is one way. Hey, look, we have a chief innovation officer. We're innovative. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's not. And I think that this whole Gen AI thing has really, changing the lens at the XCOM level, which that has to happen first because it's an investment. And innovation requires failure. If you're not failing a very non-trivial percentage of the time, you're not innovating. You're just not. It requires. And yet
that goes completely against the grain of historically of law firms. It's got to be perfect.
Exactly.
It's got to be right or no good.
Exactly. Lawyers are trained in the exact opposite direction. So the concept,
because they have to be. They have to have it right.
Yeah, I mean the cost of mistakes is huge, and malpractice suits are real. So I think that firms have to get serious about it at the leadership level, and I do think that this transition that we're in, I'll call it that, this wave of Gen AI has really opened eyes in a way that I see firms now writing checks that in the past I would historically have seen a lot of resistance to. Look at the cloud. Look how long it took for firms to get to the cloud.
Yep.
Right? Like I did in 2014, I did 22 roadshows talking about SharePoint Online, and I was 10 years too early, man. Like I used to have hair before 2014. Like, I drove myself into the ground beating that drum, and I was way too early. I had still not learned just how much resistance there is to change in the industry. And I'm starting to see signs of that changing. Even like the ABA guidelines around law firm ownership. You're seeing states now like Arizona that are softening on that. And let's be honest, if we are, as an industry, ever going to have law firms in that Fortune 500 caliber of revenue, K&E is close. They're just outside of the revenue requirement, which is about $7.5 billion to make. They can't be in the Fortune 500 because they're not public. But if we're going to have firms scale to that size, you have to have CEOs that aren't lawyers. You being the CEO because you're the best at lawyering is not a good thing. So I'm starting to see just fundamental structural changes that I think will help address this innovation theater concept, and hopefully we'll have some meaningful change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Ted, I've got a business proposition for you for a podcast. Well, this would have to be a YouTube channel. Why don't we create the Mystery Legal Innovation Theater 3000?
Yeah.
And what
Awesome.
we can do is we'll watch some old presentations and just
do
just
snarky
absolutely
comments the whole time.
Make snarky comments the whole time. So
People would pay for
We'll
that.
pull up some of your 2012 presentations.
That's all. I'm writing it down. That is good.
That's great.
Well, now's the time where we get to our crystal ball question, and so Ted, want to throw this to you. What kind of changes or challenges do you see law firms facing in adopting new technologies? And we kind of talked about this, but like AI, cloud-based platforms, other things, and how do you think we'll be able to overcome that in the next 2 to 5 years?
Yeah. So, going back to the co-pilot conversation, understanding where platforms are and their level of effectiveness solving the business problems that exist and that are justifying the budget for the deployments really has to be at the top of everyone's mind before. I feel like there's a lot of reactionary behavior that's going on. People, it's CONI, like the cost of not investing. You have ROI and then CONI. The cost of not investing, I feel like, is driving decision making. Again, when I hear about firms talking about going enterprise wide with Copilot, like why not do the least risky path possible, which would be a small pilot deployment in a business of law function, and incrementally build on those wins that you get on the board. But I'm afraid of, kind of going to our point earlier, is we go whole hog and we write some big checks and we experience frustration with people that don't give you a second at bat. And then we're really going to have folks dug in, and I would hate to see that happen. So I'm really advocating for firms to have an incremental approach, get early wins on the board, make small bets, and build on your strategy incrementally. And don't let CONI supersede ROI, because to do so, we've seen so many. I mean, this has been a cycle. I mean, remember pets.com?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a cycle that when there's hype and people don't want to get left behind, and so that would be the path I think that firms should take.
Great. Well, Ted Theodoropoulos, CEO of InfoDash and host of the podcast Legal Innovation Spotlight. I want to thank you very much for coming on and having a conversation with us. It's been great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Well, I'll have to have you guys on next.
Please do.
Love it. So, and of course, thanks to all of you, our listeners, for taking the time to listen to the Geek and Review podcast. If you enjoy the show, share it with a colleague. We'd really love to hear from you, so reach out to us on LinkedIn.
And Ted, we'll put some links on the show notes, but what's the best way for people to find out more about InfoDash or to reach out to you for more questions?
Yeah, well, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. It's /TedTheo, and our website is getinfodash.com. I'm pretty active on the conference circuit. We do about 9 or 10 a year, so I see you guys frequently. So that's another opportunity to grab me, and I'd love to have a chat.
Great.
Terrific. And as always, the music you hear is from Jerry David DeSica. Thank you very much, Jerry.
Thanks, Jerry. All right, Marlene, I'll talk to you later.
Okay, bye-bye.